Just a trigger warning for our audiences. Some triggers in this podcast may include racism, racial profiling, immigration, ICE detention centers, or Black Lives Matter and police brutality.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Latinas Rebeldes. My name is Angela. I'm 19 years old. My mom was raised here. My family's from Yucatan. I was raised in La Puente. I went to school in Walnut, and now I'm a full-time student at California State University in Long Beach, studying criminology and criminal justice. And this is my co-host, Belle.
Hi everyone. My name is Annabelle. A little background about myself. I was born in Mexico, but immigrated to the United States when I was a baby. I was raised in Los Angeles, so pretty typical childhood. But I didn't really know I was an immigrant until I needed a Social Security, and that really changed my life. But fortunately, after President Obama created the DACA program, I had the opportunity to travel. And long story short, I was able to get my green card. So by day, I am a technical project manager working on mobile apps. But my real passion and why I'm here today is because I am a huge advocate for immigrant rights.
All right, so let's start by explaining why we're here. We're going to basically do some evidence analyzing and try to look into 2 interviews that were done by me and a few articles done by the LA Times, Washington Post, NPR, etc., focused on racial profiling. So the main question that we're trying to answer today at the end of this podcast that we're going to try to explain is, should Latinos remain worried around law enforcement officials even when they are not breaking the law? All right, so let's get started. So let's slide into Gustavo's column. So Gustavo Arellano is a columnist for the Los Angeles Times, and his article basically talks about Latino shootings in Los Angeles and how the effect of them, what's they're doing in the community, and what our reaction as the Latino community is doing. So one of the main things that we want to bring up is that he talks about Latinos being passive, Latinos not doing anything for advocacy to bring to the attention of the community what's really going on. And Annabelle, I know you had some comments on that, how you don't think that's correct, that we're not over there protesting.
Yeah, I think just depending on my upbringing and my personal experience, as I mentioned, I'm an advocate for immigrant rights because the minute you know about your status, you understand how unlucky you are, just for wanting to get a better opportunity. But when I found out I was an immigrant, I was lucky enough to have friends in the community that knew about organizations that either protested or fought for immigrant rights and for labor laws. And so growing up, I was always pretty active in that community and always protesting. And so, even though we say that there's not a lot of support, there are groups out there, but maybe it just hasn't been as prominent as what we've seen lately with the Black Lives Matter movement.
You're right. I mean, even Arellano 2021 explains that there's such a black and white paradigm in Los Angeles that we're not really seeing the other minorities that are being affected by all these police brutality and racial profiling incidents that are happening. Some of the names that Arellano explains are Andres Guardado, who was shot 5 times last June, Sean Monterosa, shot 2 weeks before Guardado, Manuel Diaz, who was shot by an Anaheim police officer in 2012. These are things that you don't hear a lot in the news, and the question is why? Why aren't we out protesting? What's going on? And I think that's what, personally, Arellano's entire column is about, is that what we're doing. Because even at the end of his article, he asked us, are we just waiting for our own George Floyd? And I think that's a question that kind of leaves you hanging, thinking what are we doing? What are we doing wrong?
And more importantly, what more can we do? Because obviously a lot of the families for these victims, they have been protesting or they have been wanting awareness. But where do we go from here? What as a community can we do to really get justice for these people?
Definitely. And actually, I was able to talk to Joseph Valadez, who actually is CSUOB alumnus, and
Yes.
he's amazing. He was a great guy. I mean, this phone call interview was like an hour and a half. I wish I could have put everything into it, but obviously he discusses a little bit more of racial profiling, especially because he was in and out of the prison system for a large portion of his life. So why don't we take a listen to it and we discuss it afterwards.
At an early age, I started getting busted at 11 years old.
Wow.
Was the first time I got busted, and after that, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, I was arrested for numerous different things from juvenile. Everything that I did is no reflection of my parents, right? I always knew the difference between right and wrong, and nobody put a gun to my head or nobody twisted my arm to do the things that I did. I can't say I had a screwed up childhood, because I didn't. That my parents beat the shit out of me or did this or did that. Well, they beat me, but not that. Everybody got beat. And then I was always racial profiled. And even in Orange County, everywhere in Orange County would go. I'll give you a good example. One time we were going down to the beach, and we made it a point, man, to do what we were doing and not have nothing in the fucking car, right? Not even any beer. We were just going to go down to the beach and kick it. We were going to meet somebody that was bringing beer that was going to go over there. Or they were supposed to be already there with the beer. We got pulled over on the beach. And the cop even told us, man, after he seen that all our addresses were from the city of Stanley, he goes, you guys got no business over here. I don't know, we can't go enjoy the beach? No, you're not, you guys got no business. Because he knew where we're from. He knew about my neighborhood. He knew where area was. You take your asses back over to your neighborhood, man, and don't come over here. You're not welcome. If I see you here again, I'm gonna run you guys in jail. For what? We ain't done nothing. This was after he had us sitting on the fucking ground for whatever amount of time, going to the fucking car and not finding nothing. And he made sure all the lights were working, right? And we made sure that we beat her. I was just fine. Watch out, see? Because that's what they would do. If your turn signal was out, if a light bulb was out, that gave the fucking car. Even back then in the 60s, we always knew to make sure take the fucking rosary off the fucking rearview mirror. Don't have nothing, because that would give them probable cause to pull you over. And I've had homeboys that got pulled over for having a rosary over it. And I know that's chicken shit, but that was the excuse for them to pull you over. Do I have any attitudes about it? Yeah, I still believe that they profile. Fuck yeah, they still profile. And you can't convince me otherwise. But now they say, well, not all the cops are bad. Bullshit. Let me tell you, if you're fucking covering up and you know one of the fucking cops are fucking up, you're just as good, in my eyes, you're just as guilty as them, because you haven't said nothing. And you're in a better position to expose that shit. So no, not all cops are, no. They know. If their partners are fucking up, they haven't come forward, they're just as guilty. I'm sorry. That's my view on that.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I could really hear the passion in his voice. He's so frustrated because, he said that he was just, it's a cry out for help. A lot of times, when you're kind of getting profiled and you're getting looked a certain way, you look out for your community. And so I think what I'm hearing from him a lot is that it sounds like he kind of wished that there was support. Obviously we can get lawyers, but a lot of people are either in low income communities or immigrant communities, and the law and lawyers, it's just not accessible to them. And just anything relating to the law directly ties into their status. And so, for me growing up, like, we never really wanted to talk to a lawyer because, it could lead to questions. And so growing up, and especially for me, the notion of assimilating, of knowing your place, of being quiet, not speaking up. And so a lot of us have grown up with that feeling. You can't really go out there and protest and stand for your rights because you really shouldn't, or else you can really get deported, and your family can get affected by it.
And, adding on to that, Ariana 2021, referencing back to his black and white paradigm, a lot of people, Latinos especially, who don't go out and protest, it has to do a lot with the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, you don't want to kind of, per se, take the spotlight away. And I think that was such a huge issue during the BLM movement in 2020, because, Latino activists don't want to be like, hey, what about us? And kind of, take that respect away from BLM, because I mean, not to say it's not happening to all minorities, because it is, but we don't want to take away their spotlight. And I think that was another issue that's going on. That how do we share the spotlight without kind of making one minority superior to the others? Gamboa 2019 interviewed Glenn Gleve from Chicago, and his family are all from the Mexican border town of Mission, Texas. So he talks about his racial profiling experience in the interview, but something I really wanted to point out from this article is that Van Cleves said when he was asked for his documents, a lot of the time was because he had dark skin. Even though he was born in the U.S., they would always confront him, and he said, it's because I just look illegal. What do you have to say about that, Belle?
Yeah, I mean, that word is... I don't like that word because, growing up, I remember immigrants were referred as literally in official documents as aliens or illegal aliens. And that in itself just means that you as a person, is wrong. You don't belong. You shouldn't be here. But what is interesting about the way he said it is that he knew off the bat that just because he was dark skinned, not necessarily Latino, not necessarily from a Mexican town, but the fact that he was dark skinned, he was profiled. And that reminds me of an incident actually that happened to my husband, where we were driving. He has his license, and just for context, my husband is half black and half Indian, but he has an ambiguous look. But going back to the story, we were in a car with my brothers going to a soccer game. When he was stopped and pulled over by a police officer. And as soon as he rolled his window down, the police officer said, "Sir, do you speak Spanish? Can you understand me?" And we just all looked like shocked, like, why is he talking to him that way? And my husband, who obviously is U.S. born, knows English very well, said, "Yes, I understand you." And he said, "Oh, okay, well, do you have a license?" And just off the back, just my husband is somewhat dark-skinned, but he just assumed because it was a soccer game that he was maybe undocumented and looked Latino because he was with me. And he obviously showed him his ID, and then everything was fine. He's like, "Oh, I just wanted," he completely changed his way of talking to him and said, "Oh, I just want to make sure you understood the traffic laws and you weren't violating any. Well, have a great day." And he just walked away. But that was obviously a perfect example of racial profiling. The officer thought he was Latino because he was in a car with other Latinos and it was a soccer game. But just the way he spoke down to him in the beginning and then completely changed his demeanor once he found out he had a license and he indeed spoke English just really shows how there's a lot of times where the way you look, you are automatically assumed to be an immigrant, of not being able to speak Spanish, and just very aggressive talking down to people who might have been a mistake. Maybe he did a wrong turn, but that's really what it brings me back to, is a lot of people start having these experiences that almost become real, and you start thinking, do I belong here? Like, you really start to second guess your validity as a human, and it's really traumatic for a lot of the immigrant community.
Definitely. And this exact idea of quote unquote illegals, it reminds me of Silva 2019's article about the deported Marine who they wanted to deport. They kept him in an ICE detention center for 3 days. What's interesting is that during process, when they put him in the detention center, they actually found the passport and they put it in the evidence locker. So they knew he was a U.S. citizen, but during the after the investigation, when the officer was asked, the ICE officer responded, "Oh, well, I'm not too sure it was from the U.S. I don't think it was a U.S. passport." And things like that, like, okay, that's fine, but my partner's in the military, so I know very well that when you run their name, it says, like, this person's in the Marines or this person is in the Army. It's going to say something because it's your government property, so you shouldn't be traveling from side to side without some kind of consent.
Right.
So to be told that, oh, we didn't know he was a U.S. citizen, this man is in the military, he's suffering from PTSD, and the only, evidence they had was that obviously his Latino name and the way he looked. You know, how traumatizing this could be. And it took 3 days to get him out. That's what's crazy, that it took 3 days.
Wow. That sounds so scary. And yeah, it just ties back to this notion of dark-skinned and the racial profiling of you look a certain way, your skin is a certain shade, and despite this person's credentials of being in the military and having a disability, a mental health disability, despite all that, his own people, in essence, were targeting him. And it's really sad, because you would think, it goes back to this notion of that I mentioned, of assimilating, that you think if you learn the language, if you go to school, if you follow all the rules, then you've made it, right? You've made it in the American dream. You should earn some respect. And even with this guy being in the military, I mean, he's an active duty. I mean, that is the highest honor that we really all kind of, pride to be in this country. Even in that he was detained. He was denied his rights, who, undocumented or not, everyone has a right to a lawyer and to show documentation, which he literally had in his bag. I mean, honestly, who walks around with a passport? Maybe he needed to. But again, even with all of that, none of it mattered, because he had a Latino name and he was dark-skinned. And unfortunately, he was detained for 3 days, which I'm sure is very traumatic.
And a lot of it brings back to colorism, how
Absolutely.
Because he's so dark, he can't be a legal citizen. Like, obviously there's something wrong with it, and that's what raises the question a lot of the times. Like, in the streets, when these officers are racially profiling a lot of these young men or even adult men, they just see the color of the skin. And speaking on to colorism, it takes us to Wigglesworth 2020's article about the quote-unquote child abduction. It was basically a grandpa, dark-skinned grandpa, Latino, in Torrance, and he had this blue-eyed, blonde, curly hair, white grandson, okay? And his neighbor, who was also white, decided to call for help, call 911, because somebody had abducted a white child. Keep in mind, this same lady actually had a samurai sword, and she was, threatening the grandpa because, he was stealing a child. So when officers arrive, they find out he's the grandpa. They get confirmation from the parents, yada yada,
Mm-hmm.
And turns out they just kind of leave. They leave. Mata, who was the grandpa, actually calls back the station and asks, hey, what happened with my neighbor who was, threatening me with the sword? They come to say, oh, well, she didn't do anything wrong because she stood on her property. So you're telling me a grandpa who was enjoying a nice little walk with his grandson was more of a threat than a white lady who was out in public, maybe she was on her property, with a samurai sword? I mean, I don't know about you, but I'd be very scared if I had, even without a child, just me, myself, if I saw somebody yelling at me, telling me that I'm abducting someone with a samurai sword, I'd be scared for my life, especially because of the color of my skin.
Absolutely. And if obviously if the tables were turned in that scenario, if there was a white grandfather with his grandson, and there was a person of color in their own property with even a sword, which is how did they get that? Honestly, referencing a lot of cases, that person wouldn't be alive. If you're a person of color, by default, you're more threatening. And if you have a weapon, you're very likely not going to get out of that situation alive. And so it's really sad to see these cases when it just, how did it go from a grandfather walking in his neighborhood with his son, which in the article they mentioned he did this every weekend. Mm-hmm. He was the child care for the grandson's parents. How does it go from that to almost getting arrested, and probably a traumatic experience for that little boy, which, he doesn't have a voice in this. He can't say what happened to him. Honestly, when I saw that article, there was a picture of the grandfather and the little boy, and as soon as I saw that, I couldn't help but think of my own father, who is, dark skinned. He's from Veracruz, and he actually looks very closely to my brother and my son, who are both pretty fair skinned. But in that picture, I just automatically just thought of my dad. and my son. And had they been in that situation where my dad was walking my son, are there, like, should I be scared that there are neighbors out there who are just assuming this because they're so uncomfortable with a brown man holding a white child?
Yeah, definitely. And you bring up a really good point about Latinos not making out of certain situations alive. And I like how you use the samurai sword kind of example, because it brings me back to our original prompt. Should Latinos be worried around law enforcement if they're not breaking the law? Because, you know, in the scenario they said, well, the lady wasn't breaking the law because she was on her own property. She had a samurai sword. So you're telling me if a Latino was on his own property and he had a sword, would it still be breaking law? Should they be scared? Because I'm sure, like, from my opinion and everything we've gathered so far, like, I feel like if there was a Latino, even if it was on his own property, they'd probably be like, oh, well, this isn't your property. They'd assume that it's not their property, or they would just, well, because the color of their skin, he's a threat to society, whatever they want to call it. And of course, like you say, they don't make it alive. So personally, from just thinking about that, I don't think, like, as a Latina, I would be completely comfortable. But I mean, I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I mean, just, we've seen so many cases where just by, you know, existing, you're either profiled by a neighbor, by police, or you're actually verbally harassed. Which, you know, brings me to a personal story of mine. And like I mentioned, you know, seeing this picture of the grandfather and the son, obviously as a community, Latinos it's a wide range of languages and how we look. And as I mentioned, my grandfather is dark skinned, and my own son and my brother is fair skinned. And there was an instance when I was very little, and my little brother, who looked just like that little boy in that article, he very white, almost like blondish hair, but obviously, you know, like a Latino. You know, I was in the car with my mom and my little brother, and he was about 3 years old. And as some parents may know, you're potty training children around that age. So my little brother really had to use the restroom, and we couldn't find a bathroom. So we pulled over, and my mom was, you know, scrambling to find a water bottle for him to pee into, which a lot of parents definitely have been in that situation. But he just couldn't hold it. And so my mom grabbed him and just said, try to hold it. And so he couldn't. So he just started peeing on the side of the road while she kept looking for a bottle. And as this happened, a white guy passed by and saw it and just immediately stopped in his tracks, turned around and said, "What the F are you doing? This isn't what we do in this country. That's disgusting." And it happened so long ago. I was maybe 12 years old, but to this day, I physically remember how scared and angry I was at how he was talking to my mom. And my brother probably didn't remember it, but I mean, in the moment, it was so tense. And like I said, this guy just verbally abused us. And I'm trying to think if in that situation, had it been a white family, if it would have been the same. I mean, not to say that was okay, but when you're potty training a child, it is very hard to control them, and they can't control their bladder. So obviously not an ideal situation, but why as Latinos do we have to be afraid to just go through these life moments without actually getting verbally abused by people? And this happened to us. To this day I remember it. And again, the language that he used is very common of, we don't do this, go back to your country. And so it's just this language of, I'm better than you, why you don't belong here, what you're doing is wrong. And so you grow up with those feelings around you, and when someone says that about you, it's very traumatizing and scary.
I'm definitely sorry that happened to you. Why don't we kind of expand on that? You know, you mentioned you're so scared, especially from that experience. Your mom was scared, you were scared. You know, I believe that a lot of Latinos across Los Angeles are scared, and a lot of it has to do with obviously social media, what we see, what we witness. But I also wanted to kind of touch base on some statistics. So Foster Frau 2021 made an article about Latinos being disproportionately killed by police. And just to give some clarity, each kind of race that was looked into was Black, Latinos, whites, and in very, very small are all others. But the three mains were Black, Latinos, and whites. So whites, 2.3 per million are being examined, and 2,890 were killed. Latinos, 4.2 per million, 1,059 were killed. And blacks, 5.7 per million, 1,512 killed since 2015. So I know obviously like the whites sound a lot, like, I mean, it's a big number. It's 2,890, but you have to think that it's only 2.3 million that are being examined compared to 4.2 that is 1,059. So I'm sure if we were to do 2.3 across all three races, you would see the actual difference in number because, you know, obviously the smaller the number, the greater the amount of people killed. And for, you know, the black people who were killed, it was since 2015. So it's not just in a year. The Latinos and whites were killed in 2019, but the 1,512 African Americans were killed since 2015. So that number is constantly growing. And you know, Latinos, I mean, we're so scared. And you know, we already have immigration issues to deal with. We have BLM protests to deal with. So on top of that, now we have stats telling us, hey, like, you know, you guys are our next target. And, you know, there was also this quote in Foster Frau's 2021 article that says, quote, "So Latinos become obscured or erased within the data because white passing Latinos will be marked as white or unknown, and Afro-Latinos will be marked as black," end quote. So what do you have to say about that, Belle?
Yeah, I think, again, this brings back to the notion that we have to assimilate and be white passing. And if just because of the color of our skin, no matter how much we try to assimilate, we are either labeled as black or just immigrants. And so it's just there's no winning really. And the numbers are saying it. And what's even harder to really know about these numbers is how much is underreported. Mm-hmm. So going back to the fact that some Latinos are being classified as white and others as black, how many of those were actually Latinos that were shot and killed that we're not accounting for? And so probably with that known, it's a lot higher.
Definitely. And actually, Rubin 2012 wrote an article about an LAPD officer who was caught changing the race of individuals who he stopped. So he was giving tickets and he would make his reports, and on these reports, instead of putting Latinos, he was identifying them as white. And when the investigation happened and they looked back, they found that he had changed his reports. Wow. You know, and he was doing it because he wanted to cover his tracks. So now we have officers who are going into the streets and covering their tracks. Like, yes, the bad apple theory says that, you know, there's only a few in the bunch that actually do it. But I mean, regardless, these are the people we trust. Now we don't know who to trust because of what they're doing. And that one was really like kind of perspective changing to me because, you know, as an former explorer, I would write tickets all the time. I once wrote 23 on the same block, but I didn't think you could easily just say, oh, this person, you know, they're not white, they're Latino, they're black. Like, my training officer would always be right there staring at me, making sure I'm not doing anything, like, you know, wrong. And so that also kind of like looks back to Joseph, what he said about, you know, you have officers who are seeing them and they're not doing anything about it, and that's just as guilty as the people who are committing these crimes. And I think that's really something to reflect on. To continue on, why don't we take a look at a deputy sheriff's interview that I actually did. So he worked for Los Angeles County. I'll let him kind of give his background, but let's just take a listen and see what he has to say.
Brief background: I studied in law enforcement in 1988. I was a police officer in the city of Compton. I worked there for approximately 12 years, and during my time with Compton Police, I worked patrol, I worked narcotic, vice, and motors, and then I became a canine handler until 2000 when the police department was disbanded and LA County Sheriffs took over, and then I became a deputy sheriff. And my time with the Sheriff's Department, I became a field training officer, trained many new deputy sheriffs, and then I took on the reserve as a TO, trained many reserve deputy sheriffs, and also became a explorer coordinator. until I retired, just about a little over a year ago. In my own words, I would say racial profiling would be targeting a person, let's say, based on just their looks or race, ethnicity. That's pretty much my how I see racial profiling. Unfortunately, it does exist, in my opinion.
All right.
And the reason why I believe it exists, unfortunately, some police officers stop people based on what we just talked about, their looks or just their race, and only on that, nothing else, no other reasonable suspicion.
So you would say that you witnessed it then, right? Like firsthand?
I probably witnessed it, I would say, a couple times. I've heard comments made by other police officers such as, "Oh, look, there's, an African American. Maybe we should check him out." And this opinion is based on, or decision is made is just based on his race and not anything else. And when I say reasonable suspicion, is there should be other reasons other than just that. How could I say, something that's based on specific and articulable facts, and not just his race. I'll give you an example. For example, if in briefing they tell us that there's a certain neighborhood where the majority of the people that live in this neighborhood are Asian, and there's information of male blacks casing the area, and they're breaking into homes, and you see a person, a male black, and he's circling the area, and it doesn't seem like he belongs in the area. He appears to be either lost, or he's just going in circles, which is an indication of possibly casing an area, looking for a target, a house to break into, or looking for a victim to rob. And maybe then we need more of a reason to stop them and to check this person, individual out, to find out what they're doing, what they're looking for. So that's kind of an example. Some people may look at it as racial profiling. I don't see it as racial profiling. I see it as I'm going based on information that I received in briefing that makes me believe that this person is somehow involved or is about to get involved in some kind of criminal activity.
Would you say, again, like if you feel comfortable saying it, that you've participated in racial profiling yourself?
I have not. Personally, I have not. I go based on more information. I don't just go based on just a person's looks. But if I'm at a certain location and I've already received information of some previous criminal activity in this area, and I see an individual, and it doesn't matter what race they are, and this person is driving around the neighborhood and appears to be casing the area, as a police officer, I feel I need to take action because that's part of my job, and not look the other way and not do anything about it. My background, I believe so because, again, I started police work in low-income area, which is Compton. I working in a low-income area where crime is much higher than other communities. I've learned to deal with different individuals, and again, regardless of what race they are. These are low-income communities, and I've learned to, I think that dealing with people like in these areas, respect goes a long way. if you give respect, a lot of times it diffuses a situation, a bad situation. It doesn't work all the time, but for me, it has worked many times. So yes, I believe it has helped me working in areas such as Compton, starting in an area like that.
Definitely. Do you think things would be different if racial profiling didn't exist? Like, would there be more crime, less crime in the community?
It's kind of hard for me to answer that. As far as would it be different, I think there would be, if it didn't exist, I believe there would be a lot more respect for police officers. If it didn't exist. I'm not saying it does exist, but not as much. And it's hard for me to really answer something like that. All I can say is, if it didn't exist, there would be a lot more respect for law enforcement.
I really enjoyed also that interview. I enjoyed all of the interviews I did for this podcast, actually. But something that I really liked about, this interview was he was really honest with me. I decided not to kind of say his name, at least during this podcast, for the safety of everyone. But he told me he didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings, so he also didn't want to sugarcoat it too much. So he told me the reality, because the reality is, yeah, there are officers who do it, but there's also some that, you have to kind of see it, especially because I'm, very pro-police. I was an explorer for a long time, but I also have to see it from both perspectives, because I'm Latina. But as someone who wore an explorer uniform and went on ride-alongs, I know that during briefings they're telling you, look for this person, look for this person, and it was a very Asian-populated community. So even Latinos stores literally would stand out like a sore thumb. And I think that's something that not everybody sees, especially the public, because the reality is the public isn't always in those briefing rooms with us. They're not the ones that are sitting down and being told, we need to catch this guy, he's done this many things already, he's stolen this many, because at the station we were at, there was a lot of home burglaries, home invasions, and things like that. And at one point there were so many happening in 1 week that we already knew who the guy was, we just could not find him. And things like that, how do you tell the public, this is the criminal, we already have all this evidence, without I don't want to say hurting people's feelings, but it's true. That's something we also have to think from their perspective. At the end of the day, some of them are really just doing their job. Others might not be, as we've already seen throughout all the evidence, but some of them, like this deputy, who he really was just trying to do his job. And I think that's also comes with the uniform as well. The career itself is, it's a risk. It's a really big risk, both because of the situations you're put in, and obviously of public's view.
Yeah, no, and I'm so glad you did this interview. It's so important to, to your point, to hear both sides. And so, I thank this deputy for, taking the time to kind of give his perspective. But yeah, I'm glad he was honest in the sense that he did observe other officers doing racial profiling. And although he didn't admit he did it himself, we have seen it in the case of George Floyd, where they were standing by, they were just doing their job. But that kind of brings me back to just what you were saying about the precinct and the briefings. And again, I by no means have any experience in any of this, but as a citizen of the public or whatever, to me what that just sounds like is maybe the system is outdated, or maybe there needs to be more data. At the end of the day, we all do better with more information and data. And so what seems to be the problem is that a lot of times, these profiles are very vague. It's a black man about 6 feet and wearing a white shirt, which maybe you can pinpoint this person, but where this deputy was from in Compton, you can, and that's where you get a lot of cases of mistaken identity and people who were just walking, like Trayvon Martin, he was just walking to the liquor store and he looked, quote, like a threat. And so what is very difficult about it is, these officers are doing their job, but maybe they're just not getting the right information, or the training has to change so that it doesn't escalate to a situation where they identify someone with the very little information that they have in a very high threat, sort of environment, and then it leads to pulling out your gun and unfortunately killing, you know, these innocent people. So it by no means is it an easy job to have, and there's not a straightforward solution. But I think the root of it all is, you know, hearing from these officers, but also hearing their perspective and how can we do better, so we don't have cases where we're just going off of race and vague descriptions.
Definitely. And honestly, your entire comment kind of brings me back to Poston and Chain 2019's article. LAPD searches blacks and Latinos more, but they're less likely to have contraband than whites. And one of the stories touched my heart because I have an experience that I can kind of connect to. So basically, there was this man, of course, who was racially profiled, and he drove a BMW, and within 1 month, he was stopped more than 10 times. And it's crazy because this man, Mangum, 37, he worked at a warehouse not so far from his home, on East 99 and South Main. He had a criminal record. He was a juvenile, vandalism, things like that. Nothing huge, major, no felonies, stuff like that. But he was, regardless, his plates were taken and he was pulled over. And, you know, it's hard because he was also black. And, you know, a lot of the officers kind of just, you know, it's LA. You see a black man driving a really, really nice car. What do you think officers think? Oh, he's a drug dealer. He's a gang member. Things that, you know, the stereotypes. And I think a lot of officers have, some of them are very guilty of that than others. But his story actually kind of reminded me of an experience that I faced. And your comments actually, like, as well, how you said there was so little information, but accusing them of such high crimes. So basically what happened was, I drove a Prius, a really, really cherry red Prius. I mean, in the middle of the night, you can see me from a mile away. And I got it on my 16th birthday. And 2 days after I got it, my mom, so at this time I was just starting, I was fresh out of the academy as an explorer. And like I said, even though I went to Walnut, I grew up in a very low income community, super high crime. And my mom decided to drop me off, you know, because I was still in uniform. We didn't want any issues because, you know, a cop in a bad community is not what you want. But she dropped me off, and so she was gonna go park the car, and she told me, oh, take my purse, it's fine, like, I'm literally not even going a block away. So she goes, and, like, not even a second later, I get a call, and I already knew, for some reason, my phone was on silent that day, it didn't even vibrate, but for some reason, I, like, felt something was going to happen. And I remember looking at my phone, and I answered my mom, like, hello, is everything okay? And she said, no, your, quote, friends, end quote, just stopped me. And I was like, what? And she's like, bring my purse and go get my license, like, now. And I'm in sandals, I'm in shorts, I'm running out. I was freaking out. And so I get there, because of course they can, like, say, oh, well, she was driving without a license, you know, things like that. Well, I get there, and she had told them, like, my daughter's an explorer, and, like, one of the deputies said, I don't care if your daughter's an effing explorer, that doesn't mean shit, you know. And so she stood quiet, she was following all these rules, and I get there, I give them the license, and one of the deputies asked me, like, he looks me straight in the eye, and he was Latino, one of them was white, and one of them was Latino. Latino looks at me, and he's like, so you're the explorer? And I said, yes, sir, that's me. And so he was like, okay, well, I'm just doing a routine check, because, you know, there's a lot of burglaries around here, and, you know, cars get stolen, and as we can see, your plates are still paper. And I told him, yes, sir, you're right, but we just got this car 2 days ago, I have the receipt, it matches my mom's name, it matches the registration, it matches her license, matches the VIN, you know, we just got this 2 days ago, like, nothing, we're not breaking any laws. He's like, oh, well, I just have to make sure. And I said, okay, I understand, sir. Like, you know, he was just giving me a hard time by this time, especially. And my mom, like, she's fluent in English. Obviously, she was raised in California, but she was just standing there because she was scared for her life. Like, she was like, are you serious? Like, I mean, when I got there, I'm just trying to, like, make this a better picture. Like, it was an SUV. It was one of those, like, Ford Explorers that they have now. Both doors were open. The lights were on. The spotlights were straight on the car. Like, it looked like there was about to be a shootout, to be honest. I was scared for my mom's life, like, and my life. And so I remember they were trying to open my trunk or something, but they were also trying to check my plates. Just, like, under the plates still had the paper cover. They were trying to see if there was, like, metal under. So I see the white officer take out his pocket knife, and I'm like, it wasn't even a small pocket knife. It was pretty big when he opened it. I still remember. It was like You guys can't see, but it was probably like 4 or 5 inches long, just the blade itself.
Oh, wow.
And then it was the handle, of course. So he pulls it out and he starts poking at the paper plate, and he's lifting it up, and he scratches my red car. And I mean, he scratches, my new red car, okay? And I mean, to this day, outside, I still have that little, like, it's probably like 2-3 inches of just like white, because he like scraped the entire paint off with his blade on my new car, you know. And he like literally, it was just like nothing, and I was just watching him, and I was just like, is this what they're supposed to do? Because like I said, I was just fresh out of the academy, so I didn't really have like the knowledge that I know now. Like, I could have made a complaint about that. I could have asked for compensation for what they did to my car, like, but no, I was so scared. And I think that's what's so important, is that, you know, when you're in these situations, you probably, like, Latinos don't have that oh, here we have to do this, like, you're frozen, because now it's like, do I be smart, or do I be smart about my life? And that's exactly. That in that moment, I think I was more scared about like my mom and I getting in trouble. Not to say that we had any reason to, but you know, what do you do when you have 2 deputies staring at you? Now that I've had so many years as an explorer, I know that when there's 2 deputies, one of them is training. That means one of them was a training officer, and one of them it was just fresh out of the county jails and academy. That's how I know that's why they were being the way they were, because one was an experience, and the other one was probably just trying to show off, like, oh, do you want to see what we do around here? Wow. And that's like a police personality that a lot of officers like develop in the streets. It's this personality that they have to act tough against crime or show their purpose on the streets. And I learned that actually last semester in a policing class, but it kind of gave me more insight on what was going on in that scenario. But now, like, that I'm older, I wish I could go back, and obviously it's too late, but to go back in time and say, like, oh, I need to talk to a supervisor because you just ruined my car that I just got 2 days ago. Not one, but 2 days ago. Like,
that's awful.
You know, and like what's crazy is that I still have that mark, as I said before, on my car, and people ask me all the time, like, what happened? Because, you know, it's such in a weird area. It's not somewhere that you would just like, cause it's literally like where the handle is to open the car. Like, you just see this white streak, and you're like, what? Yeah, and like I said, my car is red. You could tell. And there's things like that just kind of, they put me a better perspective to understand that, you know, sometimes people are just put in a position where they have to think, do I want to fight back, or do I just want to go home to my family? And exactly. I think, and in the same way, it's hard because some of these police officers go out and say, do I want to die, or do I want to go home to my family? And what's the first thing they're trained to do? Stop the threat. So it's really hard from both perspectives, but I feel like also adding on to what the officer said, we have to learn how to respect each other, because if there was less racial profiling, there would be more respect for officers.
Exactly. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and you know what, like, the fact that you can recall so vividly really says a lot to that experience, is that it was traumatic, and it is I'm so frustrated for you that you have to see that scratch in your car, which should have been you know, you were 16, you got a new car. I'm sure your mom worked so hard to get you that car, and the fact that it's all sort of, there's a black cloud over this experience because of, you know, racial profiling. Because I don't know the circumstances and what happened, but your mom was obviously acting normal and picking up her daughter from school, and if anything, she was actually trying to be more careful by taking the car and waiting for you, and then it turned into this really awful experience that you can still recall very vividly, and I'm sure that was a very difficult experience for her. So it speaks to and I'm sure all the listeners can have countless stories, whether it's your mom or your brother or your partner, of times where a very innocent moment, riding your brand new car or going to pick up your daughter from school, turns into a life or death situation.
Definitely. So, I mean, after all of this, you know, analyzing, I think we have to kind of take this back to our main question. Should Latinos remain worried around law enforcement even when they are not breaking the law? What do you got to say?
When you read that prompt to me, you know, just of course it's an outstanding yes. You know, to this day I am scared. As I mentioned, even though I grew up an immigrant most of my life, an undocumented immigrant, and it wasn't until I was 24 years old that I can actually change my status. Most of my life I lived as an undocumented immigrant, and even though I have a green card today, by default, I still go back to that fear and of law enforcement and police officers, and a lot of frustration because I have a lot of stories, of family members and friends that have been in situations like this. So to put it more into perspective of just Latinos specifically, here in Los Angeles, there is a very high immigrant community and undocumented immigrants. So by definition, undocumented means unlawful. And what some people, I'm hoping we move away from the term of illegal, but at the end of the day, that obviously by definition defines you as wrong and unlawful. And so by our very existence of just coming to this country and trying to pursue the American dream through the narrative and media and through the label of being unlawful, we are breaking the law just by existing. Even if someone like me and my family has done everything in their power to assimilate. I obviously speak English, all the time, and I went to college. I, as they say, fixed my papers, but although I'm technically not still a citizen, I've done everything right, and I have achieved that American dream, and I continue to do so. And as proud as I am, if you see me driving and I see a police officer, my palms are sweaty and my heart is racing. And if they slow down, I'm about to have a panic attack. I mean, you cannot erase the years and years of trauma, and you cannot erase the history of policing in this country. And so absolutely, I really wish that I could say no to this question, but I think coming from an immigrant experience and some stories in my family, unfortunately, Latinos do remain worried about law enforcement.
I definitely understand your experience. I mean, I do have family that's still living as undocumented in the country, so I know how it feels to even apply for a license. I mean, you think, okay, maybe they're not trying to trap me, and we should help, like, the community just get a license so when I'm stopped, I have one.
Right.
But, you're always going to have that doubt, like, what if? And, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very pro-police, so seeing both perspectives, and also being a Latina myself kind of puts me in that middle, like, are you supporting your race or are you supporting police? What's it gonna be? And I hate that it has to come to that, but it shouldn't. It should be about how can we merge this together? What are some implications that we can do? What our programs are? Because are putting police officers on high school campuses actually doing a difference? Are having more protests and attacking with violence doing a difference? What are things that we can do better? I mean, personally, I loved being an explorer. I mean, a lot of who I am today comes from that experience, and I definitely think that explorers should be reaching out to low-income community kids, because at the end of the day, like, I had a good heart. Yeah, I lived in a very bad neighborhood, but I had dreams, and I feel like a lot of the times we don't get access to those dreams the same way other communities do. So I definitely think there should be programs implemented, like the Explorers, or maybe just having a coffee with a cop. Hey, these are my concerns. What are you guys doing better to, hear me out? Well, how are you guys keeping me safe? How do I know that I can trust you? And I know actually Los Angeles County Sheriff actually does like coffee or breakfast with a cop. I know, I forget, I think Lancaster did it one year. But it things like that, like even if it's a small little cookie, like I think it's very important to have that connection between both sides, because especially the officers who are Latinos, and like in my story where that Latino deputy was telling me, I don't care who you are, like, he had that superiority. He was also male, which I think is a different issue, but I mean, there's also that, like, going against each other's race. And as we mentioned before, earlier, we talked about Ariano 2021's black-white paradigm. We talked about the statistics of what's going on, and we found all this evidence that, even me, I really believe that we should be worried even in the presence of police. And I think that even not being a Latino, you should be worried. I feel like a lot of officers are starting to develop this personality where you have to show why you're here, and I think that has to do a lot with our perception of them. Like, we're scared of them more than, they're gonna help us. So I think, personally, like, when I look at the question, should we remain worried? And for me, like, reflecting back on that experience with my car, hearing your experiences, thinking about my family who's still going through them, Yeah, I would be scared. I'm still scared. And yeah, like I said, I wore the uniform at one point, but just like you, as soon as I see a cop on the freeway, I am like sweating. I see them come up to me. Oh my gosh, it's the worst. And why am I so scared? Well, I mean, if I do something wrong, then okay, I'm gonna get a ticket at the worst. But why?
You're not.
Why is it that internally I feel like I might get shot? Why is it that I see these two officers and I think, please don't take my mom to jail? Like, she bought this car working so hard. Like, why is it that we have to question whether they're here to help us or not? So, I mean, after everything, especially Joseph's perception, as he was incarcerated, he even talked about how, like, even in the jails or before everything was going on, racial profiling was and will continue to happen in the future, and I think that's something very important that we should start attending to.
Yeah, and just to put it all in perspective, it's what's important is these conversations. It's important for us to read our history, not forget our history so that we don't repeat it. And so articles like these are so important. Conversations between family and friends are so important, and to continue to have this conversation across the line within our friends or families, but also those people who really do want to go into law enforcement for the reasons that you've said, that you had these dreams of giving back to your community and being part of the community. And why can't we dream of a place where there are variations of law enforcement, where we are budgeting and investing in mental health resources and community programs? Here in Los Angeles, there's a lot of advocates and resources for low-income and immigrant communities. I would like to learn more on how law enforcement is helping these communities.
Definitely. I think we've covered a lot today, and I really had a lot of fun doing this. First off, I wanted to thank you, though. Thank you so much for partnering up with me. Latinas Rebeldes wouldn't be a thing without you.
Thank you.
Of course. But thank you so much for listening. In our next episode, we will be speaking with Janet Herrera Bucio, a regional organizer with CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, and the work they are doing here in Los Angeles and across the nation for immigrant rights. We'll see you, Rebeldes, next time!